Snow lashed across the dark highway as Officer Mark trudged through the blizzard, his flashlight barely cutting through the storm. Then he froze. A faint whimper drifted through the howling wind. Following the sound, his beam landed on a German shepherd lying in the snow. Its fur streaked with blood and old scars, its body shielding something small and fragile beneath it. The dog's eyes met his, pain, fear, and something else. Desperation. Mark's heart pounded. What could this wounded animal possibly be protecting in the middle of a storm? He knelt slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, and when he brushed aside the snow to see what lay beneath, the truth shattered him. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind howled like a living thing, hurling shards of ice against Officer Mark's patrol car. Visibility was near zero. The headlights only revealed a wall of swirling white. Every few minutes, his radio crackled with static. Another stranded vehicle, another call for help. But out here, miles from the main road, Mark was alone. The blizzard had swallowed the world whole. He tightened his gloves and leaned forward over the steering wheel. One more pass, then I'm heading back, he muttered to himself. Yet deep down, he knew he wouldn't. He was one of those men who couldn't rest while someone or something was still out there. As he drove slowly through the snow-covered stretch, something flickered at the edge of his vision. At first he thought it was just wind-tossed debris. But then he saw it again, movement faint and low to the ground. He slowed the car, squinting through the frosted windshield. Could be an animal, he whispered, switching on his spotlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on a shadow curled up beside the road. Mark's heart skipped. It wasn't debris. It was a dog. He stopped the car, the tires crunching through the frozen surface. The moment he opened the door, the cold slammed into him like a wall. He raised his flashlight and trudged forward, snow already piling against his boots. The shape came into focus, a German shepherd, lying motionless in the snow. Mark's stomach tightened. Its fur was matted with frost, and across its body, faint scars glistened under the flashlight beam. The dog's sides moved in shallow breaths. It was alive. Barely. Then he heard it, a faint whimper. But it didn't come from the dog. It came from somewhere beneath it. Mark froze, his breath catching in his throat. "What are you hiding, boy?" he murmured. The storm howled louder, but the officer barely noticed. Instinct told him this was no ordinary rescue. Something about this moment, about this dog, was different. Something in his gut told him this was only the beginning. Mark knelt beside the German shepherd, his gloved hand trembling slightly as he reached out. The dog's eyes fluttered open, dark, glassy, full of pain but also warning. A low growl rumbled in its chest, weak yet filled with determination. Mark stopped midway, lowering his voice. "Easy, buddy. I'm here to help." The wind screamed across the open stretch, carrying fine needles of snow that stung his face. But underneath that howl, he heard it again, soft, fragile, unmistakable. A whimper. He turned his head, scanning the snow around the shepherd. Nothing. The sound came again, even fainter this time. He leaned closer, pressing his ear near the dog's chest. No, it wasn't coming from the dog's lungs. It was coming from beneath its body. Mark's breath hitched. Carefully, he brushed aside a layer of snow near the shepherd's front leg. The dog growled again, shifting its weight protectively over the spot. "It's okay," Mark said, his tone calm, reassuring. "I promise I won't hurt whatever you're guarding." The shepherd's breathing quickened, and for a moment their eyes met. Officer and animal, both exhausted by the storm, yet united by instinct. Then, as if understanding, the dog slightly moved its foreleg aside, exposing a small patch of dark fur beneath it. Mark's flashlight trembled in his grasp. There, tucked beneath the shepherd's chest, was a tiny puppy, barely moving, its body half buried in the snow. It let out another weak cry, a sound that pierced through the chaos of the blizzard and straight into Mark's chest. "Dear God," he whispered. The mother, or maybe the protector, had been shielding it this whole time. He looked back toward his patrol car, its red and blue lights flickering faintly through the curtain of snow. It felt miles away. The shepherd whimpered softly, licking the puppy's frozen ear as if begging Mark to help. His throat tightened. "I've got you both," he promised, unzipping his jacket to prepare for what came next. The storm roared, the night pressed closer, but Officer Mark knew. He couldn't turn back now. The faint whimper had become his mission. The wind cut across the frozen plain as Mark crouched lower, shielding his flashlight with one hand. The German Shepherd trembled, its fur crusted with ice, yet its body remained curved protectively around the fragile puppy beneath it. Mark's breath came out in foggy bursts as he spoke softly. "You've been out here a long time, haven't you?" The dog's ear twitched at the sound of his voice. Slowly, Mark extended his gloved hand, letting the dog sniff the air between them. The shepherd's nostrils flared weakly, then relaxed, though its body still tensed as if ready to defend the small life it guarded. Mark felt an ache in his chest. Loyalty like this wasn't taught. It was born from something deeper. Carefully, he brushed more snow aside, revealing the full picture. The puppy's tiny body was pressed against the shepherd's belly, wrapped beneath its mother's legs like a living cocoon. Both animals were shaking uncontrollably. Frost had gathered along their lashes and whiskers, glinting in the harsh beam of his light. Mark pulled off one glove and gently touched the shepherd's fur. The temperature difference was shocking. The dog's body was ice cold, its pulse weak but steady. "You're freezing yourself to save that pup," he murmured, voice breaking with awe. The shepherd lifted its head slightly, eyes half-lidded as if acknowledging the truth. He knew he had to move fast. Hypothermia was closing in, but lifting them in this condition could be fatal too. He removed his coat, wrapping it first around the puppy, then draped part of it over the mother. The shepherd didn't resist this time. It simply sighed as though surrendering to a stranger's kindness. "Hang in there," Mark whispered. "We'll get you out." He cradled the shivering puppy against his chest, feeling its faint heartbeat against his own. Then he turned back to the dog, who was still watching him, eyes filled with silent trust. In that moment, Mark realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a plea for hope, buried in snow and scars. Mark's knees sank deeper into the snow as he inched closer to the German Shepherd. The wind howled relentlessly, swirling flakes around them like a white curtain. The dog's breathing was ragged, every rise and fall of its chest slow and labored. Yet when Mark extended his hand again, the shepherd's eyes snapped open. Alert, cautious, protective. A low growl rumbled from its throat, weak but filled with warning. Mark froze. His training told him to stay still, to let the animal decide. "Easy, boy. Or girl," he whispered through chattering teeth. "You did good. You kept the little one safe." The dog's gaze flicked to the puppy bundled in Mark's jacket, then back to him. It didn't snarl again. Instead, it whimpered softly, a sound that carried exhaustion more than aggression. Slowly, Mark unzipped his jacket just enough to show the tiny pup resting against his chest, breathing weakly but alive. "See, I'm keeping it warm," he said gently. "You can trust me." The shepherd blinked as though weighing his words. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, two guardians meeting in the middle of a storm. Finally, the dog's body relaxed. Its head lowered into the snow and its eyes softened. Mark took that as permission. He placed a careful hand on its shoulder, feeling the coarse fur beneath his fingers. Scars ran across the skin like old stories, deep cuts, healed unevenly, signs of pain and survival. "Who did this to you?" Mark murmured, voice cracking in the bitter wind. He felt the tremor in the dog's muscles as it leaned slightly into his touch, no longer resisting. He slid his other arm beneath the shepherd's body, testing its weight. It groaned but didn't pull away. The storm roared louder, but Mark barely noticed. He had gained something precious in that instant, trust. And with that trust came a silent responsibility, to protect this wounded soul that had already risked everything to save another. Mark's heart pounded as he crouched lower beside the fallen shepherd. The tiny puppy shivered violently in his arms, its fur stiff with frost, its eyes barely open. He looked back at the mother. Her gaze was locked on him as if silently pleading. Snow gathered on her muzzle, but she didn't move an inch away from the little one. "Easy. I've got him," Mark murmured, pressing the puppy closer to his chest to share his body heat. The fragile creature let out a soft squeak, the faintest sign of life. Relief flooded through him, but it was fleeting. He noticed something else beneath the mother's front paw, something small and glinting faintly under the flashlight's beam. He brushed the snow aside and froze. A torn piece of fabric, a scrap from what looked like a baby blanket. His pulse quickened. Why would this dog be guarding a puppy in a human blanket in the middle of nowhere? Mark swallowed hard. What happened here? He whispered. The shepherd's ear twitched, her eyes flicking from the blanket to the tiny pup, then back to him. She gave a soft, sorrowful whine, one that pierced deeper than the storm's cold. A sudden gust of wind nearly knocked him backward. The storm was growing worse. He needed to move them now, but every instinct screamed that this wasn't just about survival. There was a story buried here, one the snow was trying to hide. He quickly tucked the blanket piece into his pocket and lifted the puppy inside his jacket again. Then he slipped his arms beneath the shepherd, who groaned but didn't resist. "Hang in there," he muttered. "We'll figure this out." As he trudged through the blizzard, carrying both lives in his arms, Mark couldn't shake the image of that blanket fragment. Whatever this dog had been protecting, it wasn't just her pup. It was a secret, one that was about to change everything. Snow hammered down harder, blanketing the road faster than Mark could walk. The wind roared in his ears, drowning every sound except his own labored breathing. The German shepherd hung limply in his arms, her body heavy, her fur soaked through. Inside his jacket, the puppy whimpered softly, its tiny movements weakening. Mark's vision blurred as he pushed forward, each step sinking deep into the drifts. "Come on, stay with me," he gasped, tightening his grip on the mother. "We're almost there." But the truth was, the patrol car seemed impossibly far away, its faint flashing lights now just a blur through the curtain of white. He stumbled, knees hitting the icy ground. The pain shot through his legs, but he refused to stop. His breath came in sharp bursts, fogging up his face shield. He forced himself upright, adrenaline burning through the exhaustion. "Not giving up on you," he muttered. "Not tonight." The shepherd stirred weakly, her paw twitching. Mark looked down. Her eyes opened halfway, clouded but aware. She gave a faint whine, her gaze drifting to his chest where her puppy was tucked safely. That small sound fueled him more than any burst of strength could. "Yeah, he's safe," Mark said, voice breaking against the storm. "Because of you." He reached the car and nearly collapsed against the door. The moment he opened it, the interior light spilled across the snow, golden against the endless white. He laid the shepherd gently across the back seat, wrapping her in an emergency blanket, then unzipped his jacket to check the puppy. Still breathing, but barely. Mark cranked the heat to maximum, his hands trembling as he rubbed the tiny creature's back. The mother's eyes flickered open again, as if she needed to see her pup one more time. "Don't close your eyes," he whispered urgently. "We're getting out of this." He slammed the gear shift into drive, tires spinning before gripping the ice. As the car lurched forward into the storm, Officer Mark whispered the only promise that mattered. "No one's dying on my watch tonight." The patrol car's engine groaned under the strain as it fought through the rising snow. Mark leaned forward, eyes squinting through the frosted windshield. The heater blasted at full power, but it could barely cut through the freezing air. He glanced in the rearview mirror. The German shepherd lay motionless on the seat, wrapped in the emergency blanket, her breaths shallow and uneven. The puppy nestled in his jacket had stopped moving. No, not now," Mark muttered, pulling the car to a halt. He turned around quickly, pressing 2 fingers to the tiny pup's chest. For a terrifying second, he felt nothing. Then a faint twitch. Still alive, barely. Relief flooded him, but it was fleeting. The shepherd's head was slipping lower, her strength draining away. Mark tore off his gloves, reaching back to gently lift her muzzle. "Hey, stay with me," he said, his voice trembling. Her eyes flickered open, cloudy and tired. She gave a faint sigh, as if she knew her job was done. "No, don't do that," Mark pleaded. "You're not done yet." Outside, the blizzard screamed against the car, rattling the windows like a warning. Time was running out. He grabbed the radio, shouting into it through static. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42, emergency transport. I've got 2 canines in critical condition. I need animal medical response now." The reply came through, broken and faint. "Copy that, Unit 42. Roads are closing fast. Hang tight until help." Then silence. Mark slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Hang tight?" he shouted. "They won't survive waiting." His jaw clenched as he stared out into the white void. Then he made his choice. He opened the door, grabbed the emergency thermal wrap, and stepped into the storm once again. The shepherd whimpered softly as he lifted her into his arms, the puppy still pressed close to his chest. Snow blinded him instantly, but he didn't care. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed, but his resolve didn't falter. Somewhere ahead through the storm was hope, and he was carrying it. Mark pushed through the blinding wall of snow, his boots crunching against the ice as he fought to keep his balance. The wind howled so fiercely it felt like it wanted to tear the shepherd from his arms. His vision blurred, but he refused to stop. Every few seconds he looked down at the limp form in his arms. The mother's fur was stiff with frost, her breathing faint. Inside his jacket, the puppy was silent now, so still that fear began clawing at his chest. He stumbled toward the faint glow of a service outpost light in the distance. His radio crackled to life again, just barely. Unit 42 status check, do you copy? The voice was distorted, swallowed by static. Mark pressed the transmitter against his mouth. This is Officer Mark Hayes. I have 2 injured animals. Severe hypothermia, 1 adult shepherd, 1 pup. I need emergency veterinary response right now. Static, then a pause. Copy that. Coordinates received, stay put. Medical unit en route. Stay put? Impossible. If he stood still, they'd both die. Mark's breath came out ragged, visible in the cold like smoke. Negative, he growled. I'm heading toward Route 17 checkpoint. Meet me halfway. The line went dead, but it didn't matter. He shifted his grip, pulling the shepherd closer. Her head lolled against his arm, eyes barely open. You hear that? He whispered. Help's coming. You just have to hold on. The outpost light flickered closer with each step, glowing weakly through the snow. Mark's muscles screamed in pain, his legs numb. At one point his knee buckled and he nearly fell. But the puppy's faint squeak from inside his jacket stopped him. It was alive, still fighting. He stumbled forward again, shouting through the wind. Hang in there. The snow swallowed his voice, but he didn't care. He could already hear faint sirens in the distance, hope piercing through the storm's roar. Mark clutched both dogs tighter, his heart hammering in his chest. You're not dying on me, he whispered. Not after everything you've survived. By the time Mark reached the checkpoint, his hands were numb and his uniform soaked through. The sirens he'd heard were closer now, 2 rescue vehicles cutting through the storm. But he couldn't wait for them. He yanked open his squad car door and climbed inside, the warmth from the heater blasting against his frozen skin. The sudden temperature change stung like fire, but he ignored it. He gently laid the German shepherd across the passenger seat. Her breathing was shallow, her chest barely rising. Frost melted from her fur, dripping onto the seat in tiny streams. Mark unzipped his jacket and pulled out the puppy. It was limp, motionless. His heart lurched. Come on, little one. Breathe, he whispered, rubbing the pup's tiny chest between his palms. Seconds dragged like hours, then a faint whimper, a tiny sound that made his throat tighten. That's it. You're a fighter, Mark said softly, wrapping it in a blanket. He looked at the shepherd, whose eyes had opened slightly, tracking his movements. You did good, he murmured. You kept your baby alive. The storm raged outside, battering the windows, but inside the car was a fragile bubble of warmth and hope. Mark leaned back in his seat, trying to steady his shaking hands. Hang in there, girl. Medics are minutes away. He tore open a first aid kit and found a thermal patch. Peeling it open, he placed it gently against the shepherd's side, then another over the puppy. The mother's tail gave a faint twitch. It was enough to break him. You're safe now, he said quietly. Both of you. As the flashing red and white lights of the rescue team appeared through the snow, Mark exhaled a shaky breath. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding it. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to believe they might make it. He reached out and stroked the shepherd's scarred head. You're not alone anymore, he whispered. Not tonight. The blizzard had calmed by the time the emergency unit reached the animal clinic. The storm's roar faded into a heavy silence, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Mark followed the rescuers inside, his boots leaving wet prints across the tile floor. He'd carried the German shepherd the entire way, refusing to let anyone else take her until she was safely on the exam table. Severe hypothermia, the vet muttered, checking vitals. Multiple scars, some old, some recent. Her tone shifted from clinical to amazed. It's a miracle she's alive. Mark stood quietly, still holding the puppy wrapped in his jacket. The little one was breathing now, slow but steady. A young nurse hurried over and gently took it from him, placing it under a heat lamp. We'll keep him warm, she said softly. The shepherd's body twitched as the vet worked. Tubes were connected, warm fluids administered, oxygen supplied. Mark clenched his fists, watching helplessly as her chest rose and fell. He'd faced danger, death, and disaster on duty before, but this, watching a creature that had fought the elements to protect another, felt personal. "She's fighting," the vet said after several tense minutes. "She's not giving up." Mark exhaled a long breath he didn't know he was holding. He crouched beside the table, resting a hand gently on the dog's paw. "You're safe now," he murmured. "You don't have to fight alone anymore." For a moment, he thought he saw her ear twitch at the sound of his voice. The nurse smiled faintly. "She heard you." Hours slipped by in quiet anticipation. The storm outside eased into a whisper, and in its place came the steady rhythm of two fragile heartbeats. Mother and pup, both survivors of a night that should have claimed them. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up. Yet even through the fatigue, one thought burned clear. This wasn't just chance. Fate had put him on that road for a reason, and he intended to find out why. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through the frosted windows of the clinic. The storm had passed, leaving behind a white, silent world outside. Mark sat in the corner, a paper cup of cold coffee forgotten in his hand. The shepherd lay on the recovery bed, connected to tubes and monitors, her chest rising more steadily now. The puppy slept in a small heated box nearby, tiny paws twitching in dreams. A soft knock broke the stillness. The vet, Dr. Lewis, stepped inside holding a clipboard. "Officer Hayes," she said gently. "We scanned the microchip you mentioned." "It's quite a story." Mark straightened, tension knotting in his chest. "Go on." Dr. Lewis adjusted her glasses, reading from the report. "Her name is Shadow. Registered to a man named Carl Benton, retired rescue worker. According to the record, she was part of a K-9 disaster response team. 3 years ago, there was a building collapse. She saved 2 victims before a secondary explosion injured her handler and left her severely wounded. She was declared missing soon after." Mark's stomach dropped. "So she was abandoned after the incident?" The vet hesitated. "That's the strange part. The handler passed away during recovery. Shadow's last location was logged near the outskirts of town. No one came to claim her after that." Mark's eyes fell to the shepherd's scars, each one now carrying a story he hadn't known but somehow already felt. He reached out, brushing her paw lightly. "You kept saving lives, even after everyone gave up on you." Dr. Lewis smiled faintly. "She's a fighter. You should know her vitals are improving. With care, she'll make a full recovery." Mark exhaled deeply, glancing at the tiny pup nearby. "She's not just a survivor," he said quietly. "She's a hero." Outside, sunlight began melting the snow, and for the first time since the storm, the world didn't look so cold. Later that afternoon, the clinic was calm. Machines beeped softly and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm fur. Mark stood near the recovery room window, watching the puppy nestled in a soft blanket beside its mother. The tiny creature had regained color in its nose, its breaths now steady. Every so often it made a faint squeak, and every time it did, the shepherd's ear twitched even in sleep. Dr. Lewis approached quietly, holding a small file. "There's something you should know," she said. "We ran some tests, routine checks. The puppy's DNA matches Shadow's. She's the mother." Mark blinked, surprised yet somehow not. "I figured as much," he said softly. "She was protecting her own." The vet nodded. "But here's what doesn't make sense. Shadow couldn't have had that pup under normal conditions. She's been surviving alone for months. Somehow she carried and gave birth during that time, probably while hiding from the storm. Most dogs wouldn't survive that, let alone keep their pup alive through weather like this." Mark turned to look at Shadow again. Her fur, though scarred, seemed softer now under the light. "She didn't just survive," he murmured. "She refused to die because someone else needed her." The vet smiled faintly. "That's maternal instinct at its purest. She must have scavenged food, found shelter, even fought off predators, all while wounded." Mark's throat tightened. He knelt beside the crate, resting a hand against the glass. The puppy stirred, then let out a soft yawn. "She was alone out there, and still, she never gave up," Dr. Lewis sighed. "Animals like her, they're rare. She's got more heart than most humans I know." Mark chuckled softly, his eyes misting. "You and me both, Doc." He looked at the two of them. Mother and child, survivors of the storm, bound by love stronger than fear. "You weren't just protecting your pup," he whispered to Shadow. "You were protecting hope itself." Outside, the snow began to fall again, but this time softly, peacefully. Like a blessing from the sky, days turned into weeks, and the clinic room that once echoed with quiet beeps now filled with gentle sounds. Soft barks, playful whimpers, and the steady rhythm of recovery. Mark became a daily visitor. Each morning before his shift and each night after patrol, he would stop by to see Shadow and her pup. At first, the shepherd would only lift her head when he entered, eyes cautious, testing his intentions. But soon her tail began to thump weakly against the bedding whenever he approached. "You remember me, huh?" Mark would say, smiling as he knelt beside her. He'd bring bits of cooked chicken or the small stuffed ball her pup had started to chase. The tiny one, now full of energy, would wobble across the floor, tripping over its own paws while Shadow watched like a proud mother. Dr. Lewis often stood in the doorway, watching quietly. "You know," she'd tease, "I think she trusts you more than anyone here." Mark would just chuckle, scratching behind Shadow's ear. "She's earned that right." One evening, he arrived later than usual. The clinic was dimly lit, snow falling softly outside again. When he entered the recovery room, Shadow stood up for the first time without assistance. She took a cautious step toward him, then another, and gently pressed her head against his hand. Mark froze, overwhelmed. He knelt, feeling her weight lean against him. "You did it, girl," he whispered. "You're stronger than ever." The pup yipped and pawed at his boot, demanding attention. Mark laughed, scooping it up. "You've got her spirit too, little one." That night, as he left the clinic, something inside him shifted. What began as a rescue had become something far deeper, a bond built not from duty, but from understanding. Shadow wasn't just healing from her wounds. She was learning to trust again. And somehow, Mark realized, so was he. The morning sun poured through the clinic's frosted windows, painting golden streaks across the tiled floor. Mark stood quietly near the doorway, coffee in hand, watching Shadow and her puppy play together. The little one, now stronger and clumsily adventurous, nipped at its mother's tail while she pretended to scold it with a gentle bark. It was a picture of peace, of life restored. But beneath that calm, Mark's heart felt heavy. Today was decision day. Dr. Lewis entered, holding a clipboard. "The adoption forms are ready," she said softly. "We've had a few applications already. Shadow and her pup are healthy enough to go home soon." Mark nodded slowly, though his chest tightened at her words. "That's great news," he managed. But even as he said it, he knew the thought of them leaving felt wrong, like watching family walk away. Dr. Lewis studied him with a knowing smile. "You've been here every day, Officer Hayes. You sure you want someone else to take them?" Mark didn't answer at first. He walked over to the crate where the puppy was tugging at his shoelace. Shadow raised her head, eyes meeting his in that same silent, soulful way she had the night of the storm. There was trust there now, and something more. Connection. He crouched down, rubbing the pup's head gently. "What do you think, girl?" he whispered. "You ready for a home?" The shepherd tilted her head, as if she understood. Finally, Mark exhaled and turned to Dr. Lewis. "Forget the applications," he said with a faint smile. "They're coming home with me." The vet's expression softened. "I thought you'd say that." As Mark signed the papers, Shadow rested her head on his knee, and the puppy curled up at his boot. It felt like the universe had finally stitched something back together. Two souls once lost in the snow had found the one person who'd never stop fighting for them. Months passed and winter gave way to a soft, golden spring. The town thawed, trees bloomed, and laughter returned to the streets. But for Officer Mark Hayes, the world had changed in a quieter, deeper way. Each morning, when he stepped out in uniform, two familiar figures trotted beside him, Shadow, now strong and radiant, and her playful pup, whom he'd named Snow. They were inseparable. Whether on patrol, community visits, or training days, the pair became local heroes in their own right. Children at the park would run to meet them, laughing as Snow rolled on his back while Shadow stood proudly, soaking in the affection she'd once feared. Mark often caught himself smiling at the sight, thinking how far they'd all come from that storm. One crisp morning, as the three walked their usual route, Shadow suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her ears perked up, body tense. Mark followed, her gaze toward an elderly man struggling to cross the icy street. Without a command, Shadow moved, calm, focused, steady. She positioned herself at his side, nudging him gently until he reached the curb safely. The man chuckled, patting her head. "Smart girl," he said warmly. Mark watched, pride swelling in his chest. "Still saving lives," he murmured. When they returned home later, Snow bounded onto the porch and plopped down beside his mother, tail wagging. Mark leaned against the railing, watching them as the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. He reached down to scratch Shadow's ear. "You were protecting life that night," he said softly. "Now you're living it." Shadow looked up, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight, then rested her head against his knee. In that quiet moment, everything made sense. The storm, the rescue, the scars. They weren't marks of pain anymore. They were proof of love that refused to die. As the evening breeze rustled through the trees, Mark whispered, "Welcome home, hero."